Chapter 1 of the Albert Gate Mystery. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Carolin. The Albert Gate Mystery by Tracy. Chapter 1. A Mysterious Crime. Reginald Brett, barrister at law and amateur detective, had seldom been more at peace with the world and his own conscience than when he entered the dining-room of his cosy flat this bright October morning. Since the famous affair of Lady Delia Lyle's disappearance and death, he had not been busy, and the joy of healthy idleness is only known to the hard worker. Again, while dressing, he had received a letter inviting him to a quiet shoot at a delightful place in the country. All these things blended with happy inconsequence to render Brett contented in mind and affable in manner. "It's a fine morning, Smith," he said cheerily, as he settled himself at the table where his man was already pouring out the coffee. "Beautiful, sir," said Smith. "Smith?" "Yes, sir." "Not even the best English autumn weather can stand being called beautiful. Don't do it. You'll open the floodgates of heaven." Smith laughed decorously. He had not the slightest idea what his master meant, but if it pleased Mr. Brett to be jocose, it was the duty of a servant who knew his place to be responsive. The barrister fully understood Smith's delicate appreciation and its limits. He instantly noticed that the morning's paper, instead of reposing next to his folded napkin, was placed out of reach on a sideboard, and that the eggs and bacon made their appearance half a minute too soon. As an expert swordsman delights to execute a pas en tierce with an umbrella, so did the cleverest analytical detective of the age resolve to amaze his servitor. "Smith," he said suddenly, composing his features to their most severe cross-examination aspect, "I think the arrangement is an excellent one." "What arrangement, sir?" "That Mrs. Smith and yourself should have a few days' holiday, while Mrs. Smith's brother takes your place during my forthcoming visit to Lord Northallerton's. Why, man, what is the matter? Is it too hot?" For the cover Smith had lifted off the bacon and eggs clattered violently on the table. "'Ot, sir, 'ot isn't the word. You're a fair licker, that's what you are." Smith invariably dropped his H's when he became excited. "Smith, I insist that you shall not call me names. Pass the paper." "But, sir—" "Pass the paper. Utter another word and I refuse to accept Mrs. Smith's brother as your locum tenens." Smith was silenced by the last terrible epithet. Yet he was so manifestly nervous that Brett resolved to enlighten him before plunging into the day's news. "For the last time, Smith," he said, "I will explain to you why it is hopeless for you to think of concealing tradesmen's commissions from me." The shot went home, but the enemy was acquainted with this method of attack and did not wince. "You knew that Lord Northallerton had recently invited me to his October pheasant shooting. During the last few days a youth, who grotesquely reproduces Mrs. Smith's most prominent features, has mysteriously tenanted the kitchen, ill-cleaned my boots, and bungled over the studs in my shirts. This morning a letter came with the crest and the Northallerton postmark. Really, Smith, considering that you have now breathed the same air as myself for 8 long years, I did not expect to be called on for an explanation. Besides, you have destroyed a masterpiece." "Sir—" began Smith. "Oh, I understand. There is nothing broken but your reputation. Don't you see that the mere placing of the paper at a distance, so that you might have a chance to speak before I opened it, was a subtle stroke worth of Lecoq? Yet you demand feeble words. What a pity! Know, Smith, that true genius is dumb. Speech may be silvern, but silence is surely golden." The barrister solemnly unfolded the paper, and Smith faded from the room. On a page usually devoted to important announcements, the following paragraphs stood forth in the boldness of leaded type. "Mysterious occurrence in the West End. An affair of some magnitude, perhaps a remarkable crime, has taken place in an Albert Gate mansion. Owing to the reticence of the authorities, it is at present impossible to arrive at a definite conclusion as to the nature or extent of the incident, but it is quite certain that public interest will be much excited when details are forthcoming. All sorts of rumours attain credence in the locality, the murder of several prominent persons being not the least persistent of these. Without, however, giving currency to idle speculation, several authentic statements may be grouped into a connected form. Few weeks ago a party of Turkish gentlemen of high rank in Constantinople arrived in London and took up their abode in the house in question after some structural alterations, pointing at great security within and without, had been planned and executed. Attending these Turkish gentlemen, our officials, was a numerous suite of Moslem guards and servants, whilst immediately following their arrival came from Amsterdam some dozen noted experts in the diamond-cutting industry. These were lodged in a neighbouring private hotel, where they were extremely uncommunicative as to their business in London. They were employed during the day at the Albert Gate house. The presence in the mansion, both day and night, of a strong force of metropolitan police tended to excite local curiosity to an intense degree, but no clear conception of the business of the occupants was allowed to reach the public. Whatever it was that took place, the full particulars were not only well known to the authorities, the presence of the police hints even at governmental sanction, but matters proceeded on normal lines until yesterday morning. Then it became clear that a remarkable development must have occurred during the preceding night, as the whole of the Dutch workmen and the Turkish attendants were taken off in cabs by the police, not to Morton Street Police Station, but to Scotland Yard, this in itself being a most unusual course to adopt. They are unquestionably detained in custody, but they have not yet been charged before a magistrate. The police later in the day carried off some of these men's personal belongings from both hotel and mansion. A sinister aspect was given to the foregoing mysterious proceedings by the presence at Albert Gate, early in the day, of two police sergeants, who were followed, about 12 o'clock, by Dr. Tennyson Coke, the greatest living authority on toxicology. Dr. Coke and the other medical gentlemen subsequently refused to impart the slightest information as to the reasons that led the police to seek their services, and the Scotland Yard authorities are adamant in the matter. The representative of a news agency was threatened with arrest for trespass when he endeavoured to gain admission to the Albert Gate house, and it is quite evident that the police are determined to prevent the facts from leaking out at present, if they can by any means accomplish their wishes. Brett read this interesting statement twice slowly. It fascinated him. Its very vagueness, its admissions of inability to tell what had really happened, its adroit use of such phrases as Turkish gentlemen of high rank, noted experts in the diamond-cutting industry, the greatest living authority on toxicology, betrayed the hand of the disappointed journalistic artist. "Excellent," he murmured aloud. "It is the breath of battle to my nostrils. I ought to tip Smith for my breakfast. Had I read this earlier I would not have eaten a morsel." He carefully examined the page at the back. It contained matter of no consequence, a London County Council debate, So he took a pair of scissors from his pocket and cut out the complete item, placing the slip as a votive offering in front of a finely executed bust of Edgar Allan Poe that stood on a bookcase behind him. Within 3 minutes the scissors were again employed. The new cutting ran: "There is trouble at Yildiz Kiosk. A Reuters telegram from Constantinople states that a near relative of the Sultan has fled to France. The Porte have asked the French government to apprehend him, but the French ambassador has informed Riaz Pasha that this course is impracticable in the absence of any criminal charge." "These two are one," said the barrister, as he turned towards Poe's bust and laid the slip by the side of its predecessor. This time he had mutilated a critique of an Ibsenite drama. The rest of the newspaper's contents had no special interest for him, and he soon threw aside the journal in order to rise, light a cigarette, and muster sufficient energy to write a telegram accepting Lord Northallerton's invitation for the following day. He was on the point of reaching for a telegraph form when Smith entered with a card. It bore the name and address: "The Earl of Fairholme, Stanhope Gate." "Curious," thought Brett. "Where is his lordship?" he said aloud. "At the door or in the street?" His flat was on the second floor. "In a cab, sir?" "Bring his lordship up." A rapid glance at Debrett revealed that the Earl of Fairholme was 30, unmarried, the 14th of his line, and the possessor of country seats in Fairholme, Warwickshire, and Glenspey, Inverness. The Earl entered, an athletic, well-groomed man, one whose lines were usually cast in pleasant places, but who was now in an unwonted state of flurry and annoyance. Each man was favourably impressed by the other. His lordship produced an introductory card, and Brett was astonished to find that it bore the name of the Under-Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs. "I have come," commenced his lordship hesitatingly. But the barrister broke in. "You have had a bad night, Lord Fairholme. You wish for a long and comfortable chat. Now won't you start with a whisky and soda? Light a cigar and draw an easy chair near the fire?" "Upon my honour, Mr. Brett, you begin well. You give me confidence. Those are the first cheerful words I have heard during 24 hours." The Earl was easily manoeuvred into a strong light. Then he made a fresh start. "You have doubtless heard of this Albert Gate affair, Mr. Brett?" "You mean this?" said the other, rising and handing to his visitor the longer paragraphs of the two he had selected from the newspaper. "That is very curious," said the Earl, momentarily startled. But he was too preoccupied by his thoughts to pay much heed to the incident. He merely glanced at the cutting and went on: "Yes, that is it. Well, Edith, Miss Talbot, I mean, vows that she won't marry me until this beastly business is cleared up. Of course, we all know that Jack didn't slope with the diamonds. He's tied up or dead for sure. But no matter what may have become of him, why the dickens that should stop Edith from marrying me is more than I can fathom. Just look at some of the women in society. They don't leave it to their relatives to be mixed up in a scandal, I can tell you. Still, there you are. Edith is jolly clever and awfully determined, so you've got to find him, Mr. Brett. Dead or alive, he must be found and cleared." "He shall," said Brett, gazing into the fire. The quiet, self-reliant voice steadied the young peer. He checked an imminent flow of words, picked up the newspaper slip again, and this time read it. Then he blushed. "You must think me very stupid, Mr. Brett, to burst out in such a manner when you probably have never heard of the people I am talking about." "You will tell me, Lord Fairholme, if you get quietly to work and try to speak, so far as you find it possible, in chronological sequence." His lordship knitted his brows and smoked in silence. At last he found utterance. "That's a good idea of yours. It makes things easier. Well, first of all, Edith and I became engaged. Edith is the daughter of the late Admiral Talbot. She and Jack, her brother, live with their uncle, General Sir Hubert Fitzjames, at 118 Ulster Gardens. Jack is in the Foreign Office. He is just like Edith, awfully clever and that sort of thing. An assistant secretary, I think they call him. Now, we're getting on, aren't we?" "Splendidly." "That's all right. About a month ago a chap turns up from Constantinople, a kind of special envoy from the Sultan, and he explains to the Foreign Office that he has in his possession a lot of uncut diamonds of terrific value, including one as big as a duck's egg, to which no figures would give a price. Do you follow me?" "Each word." "Good. Well, I can't tell you why, because I don't know, and I could not understand it if I did. There was some political importance attached to these gems, and the Sultan roped our Foreign Office into it. So the Foreign Office placed Jack in charge of the business. He fixed up the envoy in the house at Albert Gate, got a lot of diamond cutters and machinery for him, gave him into the charge of all the smart policemen in London, and what do you think is the upshot?" "What?" "The envoy, his 2 secretaries and a confidential servant were murdered the night before last. The diamonds were stolen, and Jack has vanished, absolutely gone clean into space, not a sign of him to be found anywhere. Yesterday, Edith sends for me, cries for half an hour, tells me I'm the best fellow that ever lived, and then I'm jiggered if she didn't wind up saying that she couldn't marry me." The Earl of Fairholme was now worked up to fever heat. He would not calm down for an appreciable period, so Brett resolved to try the effect of curiosity. He wrote a telegram to Lord Northallerton. "Very sorry, but I cannot leave town at present. Please ask me later. Will explain reason for postponement when we meet." He had touched the dominant note in mankind. "Surely," cried the Earl, "you have not already decided upon a course of action?" "Not exactly. I am writing to postpone a shooting fixture." "What a beastly shame!" exclaimed the other, in whom the sporting instinct was at once aroused. "I'm awfully sorry my affairs should interfere with your arrangements in this way." "Not a bit," cried Brett. "I make it a sacred rule of life to put pleasure before business. I mean," he explained, as a look of bewilderment crossed his hearer's face, "that this quest of ours promises to be the most remarkable affair I have ever been engaged in. That pleases me. Pheasant shooting is a serious business, governed by the calendar and arranged by the head keeper." An electric bell summoned Smith. The barrister handed him the telegram and a sovereign. "Read that message," he said. "Ponder over it. Send it and give the change of the sovereign to Mrs. Smith's brother, with my compliments and regrets." End of chapter 1.